Hello, Bindu.
Good morning, Joey.
Good
Good to see
morning.
you again.
My eyes are still closed.
Coffee check.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I just got into the office, and I must say, I never really noticed it, but I really started to be annoyed about waking up in the dark. It's just not something that really helps me to wake up
Ah,
in a better state.
yeah, true. It's sort of like your body still needs to adapt to the
Mm,
winter time. I used to live in Denmark for a little bit, and it was dark when you woke up, and around 11 it would become a little bit of light, but around 2 it would already get dark again. So you would
yeah,
have months on end with like no sunlight, and then in end of March, April, you would think, there is a sun after all.
but how depressing is that? Like I believe I'm not sure. Like I think I ever read an article about um, something like how do you say that? Not an experiment, but research.
Yeah,
Research that people who live in those areas are most likely to be more depressed than other people, simply because of the amount of the darkness they get
yeah,
on a daily basis.
yeah,
It's
true.
not for me. I'm
That
seriously considering leaving leaving Europe to a more warmer and sunnier place.
I must say, when I talk to my American friends and colleagues and business partners, then they're like, "Oh, it's really sunny and it's 27 degrees."
It's like yeah,
Yes, but
exactly.
we're stuck in beautiful Netherlands with
Yeah, exactly.
lovely
The
weather.
Yeah, the last time we spoke, I think it's already been maybe over a year even. I don't know.
Yeah,
It's been a while.
yeah,
But people definitely remember the talk because I got a lot of feedback from it from people who really enjoyed it because it's a topic that most artists try to avoid because it's boring to them. Um, yeah, it's just boring to them. It's reading doesn't come natural to most artists. Um, so I do remember that a lot of artists reached out and said, "Hey, this was really helpful because I do need to know this stuff, but it's just not something I'm really eager to learn or to find or yeah." I noticed it was really helpful to them. So thanks for that. Um,
you're
and
welcome.
now the next call, because you wrote your own book.
Yes, exactly. Well, I had written one before, but that one was in Dutch,
Hmm.
and that was released in 2015. But
Okay.
ever since, I got questions from people that were saying, "Hey, is this book also available in English?" And so for years, I got those questions, and then all of a sudden, I thought, I also noticed that many people came with similar questions. So I started
Yeah.
writing down all of those questions, and I saw a sort of a red line in all of those questions. So
Yeah.
I set out to write an English book. So yeah, it's finally here
Finally, yeah. Nice. And
after
and
four
what's
years.
the biggest difference between the first and the second book?
The first book was really sort of a lot more legal text and
Mm.
really into depth into copyright and neighboring rights.
Hmm.
Also from a musician's point of view, but also it also explained music to lawyers. But this book is really an overview of the music business,
Hmm.
and really for people who want to learn to understand the blueprint of the music business and the
Yeah.
system behind it.
Yeah.
And it's really the basics of that because
Hmm.
apparently, like you say, many people, when you say business, musicians sort of run out of the door.
It's like
But
it's true.
but nonetheless, they realize, oh, but I do need to know it because ultimately that's where my payout, my
Yeah.
income comes from.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's like sort of the hot potato they would like to, they rather pass on to somebody else.
Hmm. True. They'd rather hire you to do it for them. um, I I just want to cover a couple of topics that you described in the book. Um, Simply because I think there's a lot of value information in there, as you mentioned. The questions that you're getting, same here. If I look at clients, if they receive a contract, most of them have no clue. what's in there, how to read it, what it actually means. So they send it to me so I can go over it, and I try to explain it to them in baby language. But still, it's such a it's just a difficult industry when it comes down to rights. And I hope this book will definitely help. But let's just go through the. I think I see you've divided the book into 5 parts, right?
Yes, exactly. And to me, that were five logical parts.
Mm-hmm.
Also, like from the book is sort of set up from simple to a little bit more into depth. So you sort of take people along into the music industry first. It's like telling a story, right?
Yeah,
If you watch a movie, you're not all of a sudden dropped into the middle of the plot where somebody dies and that's it. Now there's a sort of an introduction of characters. You see the context of their lives, for example, and then you see all of the action, etc. So
yeah,
I've sort of built it up in the same way because I
mm-hmm.
think for musicians it's important and less overwhelming also when they get to experience or read about the industry in bite-sized steps.
Yeah,
So the first act, so to speak, is the introduction of the key players.
yeah,
So there I just introduced like who is who. What does a publisher do? What does a manager do? What
yeah,
does a label do? And for example, how do you work with lawyers? For example, it's sort of to us it's very normal. But for most people who have never, and especially starting musicians, who have never engaged legal services, they don't know how it works. Apparently, we're also not very approachable sometimes. So people are less likely to just cold call us and say, "Hey, I've got this issue or this issue."
yeah,
They're afraid of the cost. So I also explained
yeah.
that to them.
I
How
think there's
does
a big
that work?
Yeah, I think there's a big stigma around lawyers when it comes down to the cost. If you look at movies or series, it always represents that lawyers are expensive.
Yeah, yeah.
And starting artists mostly don't have the budget, so they automatically think that's not for me. I need to fix it by my own.
Yeah, no, that's true. And understanding how that works and breaking that down sort of takes the stigma away. I mean,
Mhm.
ultimately, when people understand things, they're less afraid.
True. Yeah. Yeah. So you start off by with the key players of the music industry, which makes sense because you first need to introduce the how do you say it, like the players of the field. Let's
Yeah,
just say.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Um, and then you go on to music rights, which
Yeah.
covers copyright, neighboring rights, Creative Commons, rights enforcement, and collective rights management organizations.
Yes, yes, it is. It is a mouthful, isn't it?
Yeah.
But also, all of these things, as a working musician, you will be introduced to them. You will have to work with all those parties, and when you think about where your income comes from as a musician, ultimately, it starts with the song and the recording of the song, and that's the source of your income.
Yeah.
And everything around this music industry is based on what we call the use of music rights.
Hmm.
So, and that's also makes it a bit more complex than maybe another industry, where if you sell Christmas trees, you have the trees and you sell them. That's it. There's no
Yeah.
other rights entangled. You
Yeah.
have a product, you sell it. It's a done deal.
Yeah.
But if you do something creative, you invest in it first, you invest time in it, you invest in instruments, you invest in all sorts of things. And then hopefully somebody wants to use that music so you can earn an income after the fact.
Yeah.
And that is what also makes it a bit more difficult and
Let me
less predictable, so to speak.
let me write down something because I want to get back to this by the end of the conversation. But let's run through your book first.
Yeah. So
Uh,
so what I've done with copyrights and neighboring rights is that for people it's sometimes also not clear what that is. And if you
mhm.
understand that it's two different income streams, and then where those collective rights management organizations fit in,
Mhm.
because also around collective rights management organizations, you will know this as well. There's sort of a stigma around them as well.
Yeah.
People don't really know what they do. Um, and people don't really know if they need them and how and when. So I've also tried to explain that where they come into the picture.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I do believe like simple things. Well, simple things like copyright and neighboring rights is definitely something every artist should know. So this should be valuable as a start. Then you dive deeper into exploitation of the music rights.
Yeah, ultimately that's where we want to end up as musicians, right? If we
Yeah.
make music, I mean, it's great if we just do it for the sake of making something artful,
Hmm.
and just for the sake of creating, because that's also a thing. When you're a creator, you just want to make something. It's
Yeah.
like breathing; it comes natural to you.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you want to make that step to a working musician and gain an income, you will want to people to buy your music and listen to your music and earn an income from that. And a lot of people sometimes are still confused about what kind of uses can actually generate income.
Hmm.
And that's why is that important to know, because all those different revenue streams, those small pieces of income add up maybe to you being able to pay your rent and put food on the
Yeah.
table. And that's of course important. Or when you get agreements from publishers or labels, they have these specifications. Oh, your royalty percentage for this stream of income or that stream of income.
Yeah.
And if you know where that comes from and what it is useful for, you also know, is that a fair royalty percentage or is it something that I need to negotiate?
Yeah. Well, often these days it's something you need to negotiate. It's not really fair anymore. But yeah, that's a different
I'm,
story.
I'm sure
Uh,
we'll get into
yeah,
that.
exactly. Yeah, so in this part, you focus more on the producing and the releasing of the
Yeah.
music licensing, which is something that still happens. Kind of feel that it's not happening that much anymore in comparison to, let's say, 5 to 10 years ago. Um, and money streams and music
Yeah,
exploitation.
music licensing is a very broad term, and in
Yeah,
essence, when somebody uses your music, you're talking about giving somebody else permission to use
yeah,
your music. If
yeah,
it is, for example, think of live streams. I mean, in the pandemic, many of us have tried live streams, um, and how does that work?
yeah,
Or your music get played on a podcast, and now that we have NFTs, that's
yeah,
also music licensing, and who
yeah.
knows where that will take us the coming 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm hyped about. But that's what we'll cover by the end of the conversation. Um, Chapter 4, contracts, the
Yes,
backbone of the music industry.
yes, and the most thing where people, the most scary thing I think for most
Yeah,
musicians.
yeah.
And I've had a conversation with somebody quite recently, and he said to me, "Well, isn't it the fact that contracts are on purpose made difficult, so you wouldn't understand them as an artist?"
Hmm.
And even though he said it in a smiling way, and found it also quite funny, and so did I, but on the other hand, I understand that is the perception of people,
Yeah,
because it's true. You have to think about publishers and labels, or any other big company that gives you a contract. They're used to doing that, right? A label
yeah,
hands out 1,500, 2,000 contracts a year,
yeah.
whereas you, as the musician, you do that maybe if you have 10 to 15 releases in a year,
You're doing well. Yeah,
then you're doing already quite well.
yeah,
And that means that you're doing this 10 to 15 times a year
yeah.
versus 1,500 times a year.
But I must say that it makes sense. Like 2 weeks ago, last week or 2 weeks ago, I had a contract, not necessarily a music contract, but a different contract. And I was reading it, and it kind of was the same, as in I was rereading the same 5 sentences over and over and over again because I simply didn't understand what it said. And
Hmm.
that's comparable to some of the music contracts. Um, by now, because I know how a contract looks like in general, you can read through it pretty quickly. But in the beginning, like I remember when I signed my first contract, I went to the label to have them explain me what the contract said, because I didn't have a clue. I was a 16-year-old guy, 18-year
Yeah.
old guy, in English, the contract, so it was all new to me.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I bet they said, "Oh, don't worry, Joey, just sign on the dotted line."
Yeah, exactly. No, he actually did a really good job, as in he really explained everything, and it wasn't a world hit. So yeah, that's
But you never know, of course. No, but
exactly.
it's true. It's the type of language obviously ties back to the law, and there are certain things that are arranged in the legal textbooks, and those are formulated in a certain way to
Mhm.
give people protection. And that also means that you want to have it worded in that exact way to make sure that protection is guaranteed for
To keep
both
it clear
parties.
or something, like use clear words without having any vague terms or
Well, it's more to use the legal jargon in order to parallel the text in the law books,
okay, yeah,
and that is why sometimes those sentences aren't very clear to the
mm,
lay person.
yeah,
Um, and I think that it's quite a challenge, for example, to write a certain paragraph in a more understandable way, because jargon is being used. And also, in order to keep contracts readable and not 500 pages long, you fall back to what's in the law and the jargon that is in the law. Because if you would have to explain every single word in baby language, as you would
yeah,
say,
yeah,
then it would be contracts that are 400, 500 pages long. I'm
yeah.
exaggerating, but you get the
Yeah, I
idea.
can imagine. Is that what you cover in the topic of the book? As in, are you talking about the words that are being used, or is it more contracts in general?
Both actually. So I do, and what I try to do is first of all guide people through the process of contracting. Like if you and I would sign a contract, what is it that we want from our collaboration?
Yeah,
And start with simply a blank page and think, okay, let's first decide what we want.
yeah,
What can Joey offer me? What can I offer you?
yeah,
That's of course your starting point. Like then, how do you go into your negotiation? And then ultimately, what comes in the contract, what is written down in the contract, is a result of your negotiation, right?
yeah,
So, and once it is in the contract, what I've done is explain the structure of contracts.
yeah.
So it becomes a little less overwhelming for people. And
Mhm.
I've also explained the specific clauses that are in certain contracts.
Yeah, because those are mostly basic to me. As in, if you, I've seen a lot of contracts by now. Like most of them are pretty much the same, and
Mhm.
I kind of feel like over the years they got shorter and shorter and shorter. Like the first contract I signed was about 20, 30 pages thick, and now 2, 3 pages.
Yeah, yeah.
It's completely what's it, digested or
Condensed, yeah, it's a
condensed?
lot,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a lot more condensed. That's true, but it's also because we have more laws
Hmm.
pertaining to copyright and neighboring rights, so we can fall back on that. So we don't have to put everything in the contract.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
That's one reason, but the other reason is also because perhaps in that sense, it's easier to have
Yeah.
a less elaborate agreement. Um, First of all, not to scare away people,
Hmm.
and also to keep it a bit more more digestible
Yeah.
for both parties, I should say. Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly. Um, I had a question, but it slipped away. Contracts.
negotiations, contracts,
No, it slipped
structure.
away. No, it slipped away. Maybe it'll pop up later. And then the last part of the book, the fifth part, music as a business, which has a lot of topics in it, which well, I focus on mainly as well. So the marketing, the trademarks, the mental health and physical health as well, which I thought was interesting to see in this book. Um, yeah, can you tell a bit more about the title is music as business.
Yes, exactly.
So what's that part about?
Yeah. When you start to make that shift from a sort of amateur musician to a professional musician,
Hmm.
When you earn income, you will obviously have tax obligations. When you have tax obligations, and you will need to have a company and a legal entity. So that part really focuses on how do you structure your musical activities as a business, and what do you
Yeah.
need to think of? It's first of all, of course, going to the notary or going to the Chamber of Commerce to have your legal entity registered and maybe
Hmm.
set up. Then, what kind of legal entities are there? Then, secondly, how about accounting and tax? And when you make money, you cannot all spend it on new synthesizers.
Are you saying I should pay tax? Oh,
Well, yes. So no more synthesizers for you,
yeah,
Joey.
exactly.
But those are like very basic things. And also, if you have shows abroad, what's it like with international tax rules? And those are the things that you will quite easily come in touch with once you have a more elaborate business.
Yeah.
Marketing, then I really focus on not the practical side of it, but the legal aspects of it. And what do you need to do when you have a web shop? Do you have terms and conditions on there?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What about the GDPR, the privacy laws? If you collect your fans' emails addresses, those are private details. How do you keep them safe? There's privacy laws now in Europe and
Yeah.
also in the US. So how does that work?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
and I've given some concrete examples with some artists' websites so that you can see with screenshots. Okay, this is what they've done, just
Yeah.
to illustrate how it is
Interesting,
structured.
because that's something a lot of artists probably never thought about as well, that there are
Hmm.
other rights connected to the marketing aspect of it.
Yeah,
And you also mentioned domain names. I can imagine
yeah,
registering your website with
yeah,
your
for
name,
sure.
trademarks, trade name
Yeah,
protection.
yeah.
So that's kind of registering your brand name, probably.
Yes, exactly. When you have a when you come up with an artist name that
Hmm.
has value, and not in the beginning, but certainly when you start building your brand and your reputation, and you get to play and you have merchandise, um, your logo will have your artist name will have value. You
Yeah.
can license it to people if you have want an endorsement, for example, of a
Yeah.
company, and then for those reasons you want proper trademark protection.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Interesting topic. And what's the what's being talked about in the mental and physical health department?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, I've noticed during my time of being an attorney, of course, we work with people, and it may sound
Really?
funny to you, but
Oh,
we certainly do, and we are just people too.
yeah.
So you have two people that are working on certain projects, but as we all know, we have our good and our bad days,
Yeah.
and around mental health, there is a lot of stigma. And what people don't realize enough is when you work with creatives, mental health is very important.
Hmm.
It really seeps through to all aspects of your business and your daily life because we bring ourselves to work, right?
Yeah.
Um, and
Exactly.
and our whole selves. That means our imperfect selves,
Yeah.
without all of our flaws. And some of us do have mental health issues and challenges. And it's good to be aware of that because if you're trying to, for example, do a collaboration with another party, or for me as a lawyer, if I see that my client is not feeling well or not functioning, it may not be not because he's not talented or not because they're whatever. It sometimes just really is look at the person.
Yeah.
Do they have mental health issues or challenges? And if they do have that, you have to take that into account. And then
Yeah.
you don't want to, for example, put an artist like that with a manager or a publisher who is not a good fit for that person's personality.
Yeah. And so you've written that more from the perspective as a lawyer?
Yeah, but also to make people aware that there are mental health challenges, and why is there a stigma around it? Why don't we not talk
Yeah.
about it? I mean, we've had multiple examples, unfortunately, over the
Yeah.
last years of artists, uh, um, yeah, giving up. and dying, and simply because they didn't get adequate help.
Yeah. True.
And
Interesting.
to us and to me also, if you work in a team with lawyers and bookers and managers and publishers and labels as a whole around an artist, I think it's also our job to look out for that artist.
Yeah. That's a good thing to put in this book because it's not necessarily something you would um, logically think about when you think about a music rights book or um, a book about rights and yeah, the paper side of the industry. So I think
Yeah.
it's interesting that you've put it in here, and it's a good decision.
Yeah, but it seeps through also through all the parts. Huh? If
Yeah,
you, for
true.
example, are negotiating with your client and with another party, but your guy or gal has doesn't feel well,
Hmm.
that will have a result on the negotiation and ultimately on the collaboration. So you want
Yeah,
to be as transparent as possible, and if this person needs extra care, you want to be certain that the person on the other side is capable and willing to give this
yeah.
person this extra care.
So it's about putting the human aspect into
Yeah,
the paper side of the industry.
for sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
because that comes first, isn't it? And
true.
sort of, um, I think we have lost that part out of sight for too long, or not been aware of it. The paper side doesn't come first.
No, it's the
That's that's
human.
that's the last part.
Yeah,
That's the result of your
yeah.
negotiations.
That's what I always say as well. Like we don't work with artists, we work with humans. You know, the company is called artist coaching, but in the purest basics of everything, we work
Yeah.
with human beings, and
Mm-hmm.
those human beings represent an artist. But
Mm-hmm. For
it's a
sure.
human being behind every brand.
Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
physical health is more about the importance of sleeping and taking
mm,
rest. And when you do tours, for example, how do you route everything? Does this
yeah,
person get enough sleep or not? And it's true what you're saying. You're basically working with people, and that goes in a legal context as well.
yeah, interesting. Okay. Um, so we've covered all the parts of the book. I definitely think there's a lot of value for starting, but also more developed artists in there. I think it's good for everyone to read through and at least know what you're doing in your career. Um, is it already available
Yep,
at
it
this point?
is. Yeah, it sure is. In bookshops online and locally in Belgium and in the Netherlands,
Hmm.
through the allroundmusician.com website, internationally. So yeah, yeah, it is available.
Nice. I'll have the link in the what is it show notes, as all those shows say, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. There's one thing I want to talk to you about because that's something I've been focusing on for the past almost a year now, which is NFTs.
Hmm.
I've been yelling more about it in the past few months. I founded a different company in it a couple of months ago. So it's an industry that I'm super interested in, but I also know that when it comes down to rights, it's pretty a gray area because depending on what you sell, obviously, but within music, it's still pretty well. It's pretty vague to me what's possible, what's not possible. Can you elaborate on that? Like, do you have any experience on it, or do you have some advice when it comes down to NFTs or blockchain or whatever?
Yes, for sure. It's funny. It's funny you should say that it's a gray area. To me, it's actually quite clear because what is valid offline is also valid online.
Hmm.
And I talk about blockchain and NFTs in the book as well.
Right.
And from the legal perspective, it's like I said a little bit earlier. It's about licensing, right? And intellectual property rights, copyrights, and neighboring rights are
Hmm.
exclusive rights, meaning that only the rights holder can decide what to do with that.
Yeah.
Now, when you go to an online sort of metaverse context, it seems that people forget that those rules are there. But the starting point is that without permission of those rights holders, you cannot use anything.
Yeah.
And in the book, there is, for example, two examples of NFTs that use somebody else's work The one was a picture
Hmm.
of a painting, and the other one was sort of a mashup of a Marvel character. Now that those two, one of them, if it's a work that is in public domain, so no longer protected with copyright, you're most of the time good to go. So a Rembrandt, for example.
Yeah,
But if it is a mashup of Marvel characters, you're committing infringement.
yeah, because it's
And
licensed by Marvel.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And you cannot use somebody else's content without the permission of that person.
I once heard that if you, how should you say it? Like if you take, let's say, a Marvel icon, and put your own creativity to it, so create a whole new creative variety from it,
Yeah,
which includes the icon that might look like it, but it's your creative representation of it. That in that case, it's okay. Is that right?
no, it is not. It's
So
like
it's still.
yeah, exactly. It would have to be something completely different. I mean, you can take the idea of a robot, of some
Mhm.
or a guy in a cape, for sure.
Yeah,
But once you take the characteristic elements and
yeah,
copyright protected elements of an existing image or creation, and even if you add parts of your own, that could still be an infringement for
okay.
sure. Yeah.
And when it comes down to music,
Mhm.
two examples. You've signed your song with a label. The song got released, and now you're thinking about selling the song as an NFT or whatever you want to do. But you've signed the song with a label. The other example is you've released it on your own.
Yeah.
Is it possible to do it in both ways, or is it just only possible when you're doing it with a self-released song?
Well, it's possible in both ways, but the complication with the first example, where you signed your track to a label, is that they will see it as a synchronization, so
Mm-hmm.
a combination of audio and visual materials,
Mm-hmm.
and they will want, of course, a part of the income, but also you will need their permission because most likely they are or the owner
Rights
of
are in.
of the master,
Yeah,
or they are the licensee of the master, and then that means that you cannot solely decide what you do with that
yeah,
recording.
exactly. Okay.
And if you're an independent artist, it's a lot easier. You will have your own master, and then you can decide to use
Yeah.
it in the NFT.
So, is there any advice that you have when it comes down to that whole new technique? So, the whole new technology from NFTs or blockchain or whatever. Anything that you've noticed in the past which artists should be aware of?
Yeah, for sure. One of the pitfalls is that because it's such a popular medium, and I sometimes look at the marketplaces and see what's out there,
Mm.
and what I see is a lot of infringing content,
Yeah,
and
a lot.
a lot of infringing content.
Yeah.
Perhaps 80% of it is infringing, and when you create things, what's interesting about NFTs is also it's sometimes also with a bit of humor, right? And
Mm.
people say, well, I sort of want to have a reference to let's say Marvel,
Mm.
a Marvel character. What you cannot do is, for example, take the Iron Man's mask and then put that on your NFT guy. That's infringement. But people are just not fully aware of that. So knowing the basics of copyright and neighboring rights in that sense will have you think about, if I use content of somebody else, am I allowed to do that?
Yeah.
And that's just the basic thing. And then the other thing what you need to think about is, okay, fine, somebody has created the imagery for you, the NFT is ready. Like, what are the terms and conditions of the marketplace? What's in the smart contract? What is the license? If I buy an NFT from you, do I own it? Do I own the underlying content, or have
Yeah.
I just bought just the NFT? Meaning, just like I would buy a vinyl from the store, I
Yeah.
haven't bought the underlying music. I've just bought the right to take that vinyl home and listen to it in the privacy of my own
Yeah.
house.
Yeah, there's a big difference in there, and it's it's a good thing that you mention it, because I think that's not really something most people do. But there's a big difference in actually buying an NFT and buying an NFT. There's a lot of difference
Exactly,
in the
exactly.
contract.
Yeah, and how do you put that down in a smart contract? And what if I
Yeah,
want to resell it? You know,
yeah,
and Dutch law and European law, we have something called droit de suite, and it simply means that if you sell it, if I sell it to somebody else, you will still get a 10-15% cut or even more of the sales. Now
yeah,
we had that in our Copyright Act. In the US, they didn't know that kind of right. So that's rather new for them, and that's also why it is an interesting setup for also sculptors and other visual
yeah.
artists.
I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who owns an art gallery, and he also mentioned like there's always been a rule within the art world where you need to give like 10-15%
Yeah.
of the cut. But he also mentioned like obviously that happens with the top priority pieces of art,
Hmm.
which are being auctioned at Christie's or whatever. But the whole layer of smaller artists, they will never see any money from the transactions, because how can you trace those transactions?
Hmm.
And that's different with NFTs, obviously, because that's where everything gets registered and maybe even automated, so the transfers automatically go to your wallet. But yeah, he also mentioned that there was already some sort of right within the art world,
Yeah.
which I wasn't aware of as well. But yeah, it's good to know.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I think the tricky part in that sense comes like, let's say that I sell your NFTs to somebody else, and
Mm,
that somebody else thinks, oh, that's a really cool visual. Why don't I make T-shirts from this or hoodies?
yeah,
Then what happens? Who's responsible?
who's the owner?
Yeah.
Because that's also different. I actually bought an NFT of which you buy the rights as well, as in you become the owner of the NFT. So that gives you the right to create merchandise from it, resell it because it's
Hmm.
yours now. And that's interesting to me. So whenever that project becomes some sort of TV series and they want to use my guy, they have to pay me.
Yeah. No, but then you have to put that in somehow in the smart
Yeah,
contract, or attach a sort of a license and
yeah,
to it, and you can sort of compare it with licenses on platforms that sell samples.
mm,
Sometimes in those licenses there is a clause that says up until a million streams or up until 50,000 or 100,000 streams, you can do it royalty free. If you go over that threshold, you have to pay me an extra fee. So
yeah,
I can definitely see in the future that we will have something like that for NFTs as well.
yeah, true.
And yes, in a blockchain, it is rather good and possible to trace. But what if somebody is infringing? So this guy who makes T-shirts of your NFT and you haven't sold me the underlying rights,
Mm,
um, where are you going to go to enforce your rights? Who is responsible? Is it me? Is it the platform? Is it perhaps the agent that was in between
yeah.
you and the platform?
Is it for a lawyer? Is this a lot of headache? As in, did this whole new technology does it bring a lot of headaches with it, or is it pretty clear to you?
To me, I find it just fascinating. I've always loved technology,
Yeah,
and I hate to admit it, but yes, I think most people would call me a nerd. But so I find it quite fascinating and fun to read about. So no, to
yeah,
me, it's not a headache. But if you, I always say, bring it back to the essence of things, and the
mm,
essence of things is, of course, that there's still copyrights, trademark rights, and those are valid offline and online.
yeah. Okay, interesting. Thank you for yeah, giving us a deeper sight into your book, to know what's all about. I think it's interesting for everyone to read. I'll put the link in the show notes. Um, and for the insights about NFTs, because it's I believe it's a technology that is only going to get bigger in the future. So it's good to know how those things work, rights with rights,
Yeah.
and things you should think about. So thank you,
You're most welcome. Thank you for having me, Joe. It's been a pleasure again to speak with you.
and best of luck with the selling of your book.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.